Rosalie Wills, Connection Coach here. I help individuals heal, thrive, improve their marriages, their committed relationships by looking at things through an attachment lens. So I'm in my car today. It is a soccer sesh because it's soccer season and soccer season has started back. So here we are. So today let's talk about how the insecure attachment styles all deal with and struggle with vulnerability. So I want to clarify three different concepts first. Honesty and transparency and the difference between the two. So honesty looks like you're not lying. You're not necessarily intentionally omitting something to be devious in any way, but it's different than transparency. So honesty looks like if I were to ask my partner, where are you going after work tonight? Because you told me you had plans. And he says something along the lines of, oh, I'm going to go shoot pool with some guys after work. That's honesty. He didn't lie. He's not purposely omitting any information or being deceivious or being deceitful or trying to hide anything. But transparency looks like, oh, after work, I get off around 5:30. We're going to head over to the pool hall. It's me, Jake, John, and Jeff. We're going to play for a couple hours. We usually have a few drinks, play a couple games. Should be done by about 10:30. Should be home around 10:45, 11 o'clock. If I'm running late, I'll give you a call. So honesty gives a little bit of information, whereas transparency gives a lot of information and offers a lot more. And you really get to see more into what's going on with somebody. So in a relationship or in a conflict, that can look like the person is telling you a little bit about what's going on for them. If they come home from work and they've had a bad day and they're sharing parts of their internal world with you, it's offering up more information about them. Now, vulnerability is different because vulnerability means that there's a level of risk involved where you're actually saying something that the person could use against you or that is hard for you to share. It's something that maybe you typically would want to keep hidden. It's not something that you would want to share with a stranger or someone you don't know well. It's something that you've established trust with and that you feel that you have gotten to that level of commitment in a relationship where you can actually really be vulnerable with them. So vulnerability implies that you're actually speaking to your emotions too and what's actually going on as far as how you feel typically with your internal experience. So that looks like, comes in from work and let's say somebody comes home from work and they're in a bad mood and your question is, are you okay? And you say no. Again, you're not lying, but you're not really offering anything up. That's honesty. Transparency looks like, no, I had a bad day at work. Becky was being really ugly. Okay. Vulnerability looks like I had a really rough day at work. Becky said some things about my performance and I'm still learning. And this really made me feel inadequate and almost like some of the different girls in the office are rejecting me and I'm new here and I don't feel welcome and I'm really struggling to feel like I belong and I'm accepted. So that's kind of the difference there. All three of the insecure attachment styles really struggle with vulnerability. Probably the most obvious is the dismissive avoidance because they do not really deal with their emotions, right? They suppress their emotions. And so it's very difficult for them to be vulnerable because a lot of the time they really honestly do not know what they need. And I want to remind you that they don't intentionally suppress their emotions. I think people sometimes get in their head that the dismissive avoidant uses this as a way to not feel. And it's almost like this great tool that they have in their bag. And in reality, it's not something they have any control over. What happens is they go into this fight or flight. They start to go into their fight or flight. That's where you'll see that defensiveness and a conflict with a dismissive avoidant. What happens then is when they typically will go into that flight response, right? Like your fearful avoidant will go into the fight. The dismissive avoidant typically will maybe go a little bit into a fight response, but then they'll quickly go into that flight response. I'm going to flee from the conflict. I'm going to flee from overwhelming emotions. I'm going to flee from vulnerability, all their triggers, right? So then they get to this place where they're so overwhelmed that their brain just basically goes into this just shut down. And that's when they go into the freeze response. It's almost like a possum when they play dead. The body essentially is like, oh my gosh, I tried to fight, didn't work. I tried to flee, didn't work. And now I have nothing to do but go numb, go still, and get ready to die. And that's the trauma response they go into, and they have no control over this. This is all subconscious, and it is their nervous system and their brain that does this for them, and they just are sort of a bystander of it until they do their work. So for vulnerability for them, usually we'll send them into that freeze response at some point, so they really struggle with it. Now, in the beginning of a relationship, they can actually show up what appears to be vulnerability, but it's really not. In the beginning, before they are triggered by conflict, expectation, commitment and vulnerability, all the things that typically trigger them that you need for a real good, honest relationship after any length of time, 6 to 9 months typically. That's when they really struggle with vulnerability. But in the beginning, they can come across and seemingly share more, they really admire that the fearful avoidant or the anxious preoccupied, a lot of times can share more, especially the fearful avoidant who is, really in their feelings a lot. They love that they can share a lot. So they try to share more, but it's, again, more of that transparency. It's not really talking about how they actually feel about the situation. So if you're on a date with a dismissive avoidant and you're just getting to know them, it's a good thing to ask about their previous relationship and listen to what they say. If they tell you sort of what they went through and how, maybe it wasn't good or whatever, but if they don't assign any emotions to it and they don't talk about how it made them feel, then that's a lack of vulnerability, and that's a big red flag that maybe you're with the dismissive avoidant. The fearful avoidant, on the other hand, will overshare, and they are probably too vulnerable, and they're too quickly vulnerable. So typically you want to save your vulnerability because, again, you're taking a risk for somebody that you're in a committed relationship. They have established that trust and that connection. But fearful avoidants a lot of times will find themselves oversharing with people too soon and people that they do not know well. So they might leave a party and have, in the thick of it, while they're actually having a conversation with someone, feel very connected and feel like they're really on the same page with this person and they bonded with this person. And then they might leave and think about some of the things that they shared that were too personal, too intimate, and really start beating themselves up and feel like, oh my gosh, I overshared, I'm embarrassed now. And then they go to this place of shame. The reason that they overshare is because they need that in a relationship for them to feel safe and connected. Because they have that betrayal wound, they are really always looking to be able to trust someone in a relationship. Part of building trust in a relationship is being able to share and be vulnerable with one another. So they tend to give what they need in the relationship, which is why they will often overshare. The anxious preoccupied typically is similar to the DA in the way that they typically will not overshare. A lot of times they are not vulnerable at all because they are so afraid of being abandoned in the relationship. They're a lot of times not able to show up authentically and show their true selves. They will become a chameleon to sort of make sure that they are what their partner wants and is looking for. So they're really not going to be vulnerable and show who they really are if they feel like who they really are may be someone that their partner would reject or abandon. So that's one of the things that really makes it difficult for the anxious preoccupied to be vulnerable. In addition, they aren't able to usually express their needs or wants, their desires, or bring up conflict or feedback from their partner, because the minute their partner starts to have any kind of negative feelings about it or get defensive or maybe shut down, they immediately go into that fawn response. And so they back up, they take all the blame, they wash it under the rug because they're more afraid of the disconnection and potential abandonment in the relationship than they are having to continue dealing with the thing that's bad that they brought up in the first place. So that makes it where they can't really show up as vulnerably as they really should in a relationship as a secure, healthy person would. Now, one other thing with the fearful avoidant, when they are vulnerable, there are times they can be vulnerable because they are deep feelers, they're very self-reflective, and they usually are very good at verbalizing their feelings because they live in their feelings. But one of the things that they also struggle with vulnerability is sometimes they will overshare, yes, but when they are upset, when they are triggered, when they have felt misunderstood, when they feel like they've been betrayed, when they're angry and they are in their fight response, they are usually not good at being vulnerable. They'll say a lot of stuff about how they feel and tell you how you've made them feel, but they're doing it in a protest way with, a negative bias. They're assigning you malicious intent. They're not seeing things clearly. They're in that fight or flight, usually fight. So they're coming at you in a way that is not really accurate and fair. And it's usually not how they actually feel once they calm down and they go back down that slope and they're no longer in that fight response and they're sort of calming back down and going to a ventral vagal state and regulating their nervous system. But in those moments, they will appear to be vulnerable, but in reality, those are protest behaviors. And a lot of what they're saying is inaccurate and it's not true vulnerability. True vulnerability looks like directly asking for your needs to be met, directly expressing them, directly saying how you feel instead of just going into attack mode on your partner. So there you have it. All three of the insecure attachment styles struggle with vulnerability. And if you or your partner struggles with this, or you guys are struggling to really have transparency and vulnerability in your relationship, which is key to building trust and safety and intimacy, then I do one-on-one coaching. You can find me on other platforms. You can find me on YouTube. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Instagram. And if you want to book a coaching call with me, I do one-on-one and I do two-on-ones with couples. My website is www.lesliewellsconnectioncoach.com.